all the faces that I need to see and a number of people from the public that I can't see, but welcome to them as well. It is June 16th, 9:30 a.m. I will call this regular meeting of Council of the Municipality of Jasper to order. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda? If not, may I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda as circulated or as presented? Councillor Kelleher-Empey, thank you. All in favor? There appear to be none opposed. That is carried. The minutes of the regular meeting of June 9th have been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of the June 9th meeting as presented? Councillor Journault, thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And presentations, we have one standing presentation. We'll turn to that. Agenda item 4.1, the ECC update. I haven't seen Mr. Van Tegum out there. Mr. Furcho, who will be giving that?
Greg is, I'm just connecting him now.
Good morning, Your Worship, Council, and people following on the Zoom platform. As the Director of Emergency Management for the Municipality of Jasper, my responsibility has been to lead the municipal emergency response through this COVID-19 incident. The COVID-19 outbreak was declared a public health emergency of international concern on January 30th of this year. On March 11th, the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 situation a global pandemic. And on March 12th, the municipality of Jasper activated its Emergency Coordination Center, the ECC, and initiated the Pandemic Influenza Plan and our Emergency Social Services Plan. On March 12th also, the municipality of Jasper hosted a COVID-19 pandemic planning and information meeting for the municipality of Jasper directors, managers, mayor and council, Parks Canada, Alberta Health, and local stakeholders. On March 17th, Alberta declared a state of public health emergency. On April 30th, the province of Alberta announced a multi-stage relaunch plan. May 1st, the province moved to stage 1 of the relaunch and began a gradual reopening of services. On June 5th, the province moved to stage 2 of the relaunch. On June 12th, the Provincial Operations Center de-escalated from level 3 to level 2. They'd previously de-escalated 2 weeks prior from level 4 to level 3. On June 15th, the state of local health emergency status was lifted through the province. And on June 15th, which was yesterday, the municipality of Jasper deactivated its ECC, Emergency Coordination Center. Some statistics for the last 24 to 48 hours, Alberta confirmed 107 new cases of COVID-19 since June 12th. That's 55 new cases in the past 24 hours for a total of 7,453. There are 440 total active cases in the province. There are 31 people in hospital, which includes 7 in intensive care units. There's been 2 deaths since June 12th for a total of 151 total COVID-19 related deaths in the province. There's been 6,839 COVID-19 tests completed since June 12th, with a total of 343,311 tests completed by the lab since they started testing in Alberta. Alberta has the most aggressive testing criteria in Canada now, and the recommendation from Alberta Health Service is, whether or not you have symptoms, please get tested. Testing data helps Alberta Health Services understand who is affected by COVID-19 and provides information needed to keep you and your loved ones safe and protected. Locally, in the last week, there's been some movement with our gradual reopening. All municipal playgrounds, as well as the skate park, well, I should say almost all municipal playgrounds, as well as the skate park, reopened to the public this past Friday. That's with the exception of the Lions Park, which was required to remain closed as it requires some ground maintenance, which should have been done today or yesterday, I'm assuming. And the word is that it will be opening later today or tomorrow. The tennis courts, the municipal staff are working with the Jasper Park Tennis Club to reopen the municipal tennis courts. And 2 of the 3 courts will be operational later this week. The public ball diamonds are open for free recreational use, but will not be maintained for league play standards this season. An update on the hand sanitizing station. This is the project through the Jasper Rotary Club. So the municipality of Jasper is working with the Rotary Club of Jasper as well as the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce to install initially 18 hand sanitizing stations throughout the business district. And the majority of these stations will be in service this week. Each station will be maintained by a volunteer business. The Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce is currently in the process of soliciting businesses to see who would like to adopt a hand sanitizing station and become part of this program. The free non-medical mask, the Masking Alberta program, the ECC had previously received 16,000 non-medical masks from the province's Mask for Alberta's program. Packaging of the masks, which is 4 masks per package, have been made available for free at various locations, including the Emergency Services Building, the Service Credit Union, the Alberta Treasury Branch, the Royal Canadian Legion, Robinson's Food Grocery Store, the Grocery People, the TGP Grocery Store, the Jasper Learning Center, the Community Family Services, as well as these mask packages will be included in a number of hotel lobbies, including some special signage to go along with that. We are still and will maintain to encourage all residents and visitors to wear non-medical masks when out in public places where it isn't possible to keep a distance of 2 meters. As I mentioned, stage 2 of the relaunch began last Friday. Gyms, arenas, and pools can now reopen. Restaurants can go to full occupancy if they can maintain the social distancing requirement. Indoor recreation, fitness, and sports, including gyms and arenas, were brought forward from stage 3 into stage 2. As mentioned, the Provincial Operations Center, the POC, de-escalated to operational level 2 on June 12th, and the Government of Alberta's state of public health emergency has expired as of yesterday. The reopening of facilities and the resumption of pre-COVID services is a complex and sometimes confusing situation. While provincial directives may authorize facilities to reopen, relaunch plans must follow continually evolving provincial directives and consider the unique factors affecting each community's relaunch, including staffing, budgets, training, supplies, sanitation procedures, etc. Businesses and local governments, as well as municipalities across Alberta and Canada, are facing many challenges. In Jasper, we have rounded the curve and are looking to the future. Yesterday, the province rescinded the state of local health emergency, and your local municipal emergency coordination center stood down. Management were encouraged to assess their current and future operational needs, looking to the transition from essential services to desired and necessary services, always taking into consideration the Alberta Health Services guidelines and the Government of Alberta directives. We will, of course, continue to follow previous Municipality of Jasper safety protocols. We will maintain our personal protective equipment stores, and we will monitor the situation and be prepared for subsequent waves. So as mentioned, the ECC has disbanded, and we left the final meeting with the following objectives for management and staff moving forward. First and foremost, the safety, physical, and mental well-being of our staff will continue to be a priority. Distribution of PPE, personal protective equipment, will be maintained. We will continue to monitor and provide assistance to the community as may be required. We will maintain COVID-19 related support, information, and communications with staff, residents, and visitors. And we will stay positive, constructive, and be nice to all as we transition into these new normal operations. We all have a role to play to prevent the spread of COVID-19, as well as to stay positive and productive during this situation. And I would sincerely like to thank everyone, all of Jasper, for helping us to flatten the curve. And I continue to urge all residents to continue following the public health directives, including physical distancing, frequent hand washing, isolating if you're sick, etc. Thank you very much. And Your Worship, I'll take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Van Tighem, for what I take it will be the last of the ECC presentations on our agenda. So I share with you in your thanks to the community for acting together to get us to this stage. It really has been an impressive response community-wide. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank you for your role within the ECC and all the members of the ECC for their work throughout this pandemic, getting us to this stage. It is really good news that you, in fact, now get to stand down. But we've really appreciated the effort to date. And I open it to questions from councillors. I think I saw Councillor Wilson with his hand up, and then Councillor Journault, and then Councillor Dumont.
Thank you, Mayor Island. Van Tighem, I'd just like to again echo Mayor Island's thank you for all your week of updates. I have a quick question about getting tested. So you're just wanted to clarify, you're suggesting that everybody should be getting tested, and if so, what's the protocol to go and get that done?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, for that. The Alberta Health Services is recommending that all Albertans consider or would get tested. And locally, the procedure for that is simply to go to the local emergency, to the hospital, the Seton Healthcare Center, and request the COVID-19 test. And my understanding is it's fairly quick and fairly immediate, and you would receive the results in a few days. Now, as I mentioned, the goal from Alberta Health's point of view is that the testing data, so the more data they can get, helps them understand who's affected, and it, not just individuals, but demographics and whatnot. And it provides them with information that they need to keep everybody safe during this COVID situation. So even if you don't have the symptoms, the encouragement and the suggestion is that people would go and get tested locally.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Journault. Sorry, Councillor Journault, you'll have to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me to speak and providing me with the proper guidelines on how to speak by unmuting. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Van Tighem, for your report. There's an old minitorial from years ago. It's called "Consistency is the Key." And I see a lot of inconsistencies here in our relaunch, and not only in our relaunch, and just in our day-to-day operations. So this is a comment. It's not necessarily a question, but it's a comment that should be paid attention to by bylaw, by chamber, health, and of course your department. We have, yesterday I spoke to a restaurateur who said that client came in, checked the temperature, and the guy says, this is so, I don't care to do that. Besides, I didn't have to do it at the other restaurant. So inconsistency there. Retail, not every retail place has got a sanitizing station. I realize that we're waiting for the ones for the Rotary Club, but in the meantime, all institutions, retail should have, we've discussed this before, they should have a cleaning station. It's not hard. Put a chair and a water bottle with some bleach in it, and or bleach water and a paper towel, and you're away. It's quite simple. The other comment that I have is the distance of sidewalk seating. It's not consistent. It's supposed to be 2 meters from the edge of the curb, and it's not. Again, consistency. You know, it's an image. And the last thing is wearing masks. Now, this is by workers. This is my comment here. They in around the food industry, so behind the counter with the deli, or behind in the kitchen, behind where they're cooking food without wearing masks. Again, inconsistency, and I think that's a very serious health problem. I'm not sure who's the one to take the leadership on here. But, I think most of our visitors are going to be local or regional. They're the ones that are going to be returning. And we should be looking at being very consistent and very firm in our relaunch so that we appear to be good citizens in the tourist world and in the business community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Journault. No. If you wanted me to speak to any of those, but I'm more than happy to.
Sure.
Okay,
yes,
I'll just as we know, the COVID-19 incident is a Alberta Health or a health incident, so it's Alberta Health Services has the jurisdiction. There are a number of guidelines that you spoke of that may or may not be followed. A lot of these are guidelines. They're not regulations. They're not law. So there is no way perhaps to enforce them. A lot of them, though, that's where the inconsistency, I think, is coming from some of the business community, is some people are taking the guidelines to heart and following them. Others not so much. I have visited most businesses, provided them with the Alberta Health information on the basics of social distancing and masking and whatnot, as well as the hand sanitization and whatnot. We don't have the authority to enforce them to maintain a hand sanitizing station in their businesses by any means. There is, through the Alberta Health Services, there is an avenue for complaints, and there's the 1-866-415-8690 complaint line, where if anybody notices anything that goes against the Alberta Health guidelines, they can report that. And then the Alberta Health Services, the local officers would investigate and deal with that situation. I do agree with you that there is a lot of inconsistencies throughout the community, but again, it's some people chose to follow the guidelines and others apparently don't. We have encouraged them all, but in some cases that's not happening. And the other one was the sidewalk seating. There are very strict regulations surrounding sidewalk seating. There's in normal times, there's occupant loads that have to be maintained through a process. And through current COVID times now, those numbers are reduced substantially, and that also includes the distancing. And I do know for a fact that our officers have issued a number of sidewalk seating permits during COVID, and they have all passed an inspection of their permit process through the Alberta Health Services officer as well as our officers. And I'm interested to know, maybe not on this venue, but if there are local concerns, I would definitely follow up with those. If there are people that are not following the social distancing in the sidewalk seating patio areas, we will definitely deal with that as appropriate. And again, yeah, I guess the last one you mentioned was masking. And again, that again is a guideline. It's a very strong recommendations from both the municipality and the province. And it seems some choose to follow it and others don't. I've been to restaurants where it's different than another one. And I know I can't speak again for the different businesses, but I can just encourage everybody to please follow the guidelines and directives. And if there is a concern, then you may call the Alberta Health complaint line and we can have it dealt with. I know I'm not answering your questions, Councillor Journault. I do certainly appreciate your concerns and I do share them too, so thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor Demota.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Van Tighem. And I couldn't say anything better than the mayor. And so just thank you very much. And just to reiterate what he said, thank you for all your efforts and the ECC for all their efforts. been impressive throughout this whole process. I'm also very impressed at your memory and how you tracked Councillor Journault's comments and answered them in order. So I thought that was pretty impressive. I have a few, I think, just 3 quick questions. First of all, just going off what Councillor Wilson was saying with the testing, is there still a mandatory period of isolation after getting tested? I was under the impression there was like a 6-hour waiting period to go back to work or something like that.
There is, if you're being tested with symptoms, yes, there is a mandatory waiting period. But if you're going to voluntary test without symptoms, then that's more of a precaution and more of an assistance over to health. So, no.
Yeah, it's good to know. And if anybody wanted to apply for the sanitary pump stations, how do they go about that?
You would contact Patty Pavlov at the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce.
Okay. I apologize if you said that and I missed it. And then third, there was just some questioning around the signage that's accompanying the free mass, and I understand that it was an initiative. With, you know what I'm going to ask?
No, but I've got a comment. But go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's just the wording around it. I know that it was an initiative with Alberta Health Services, and it's to provide masks for Albertans. But I think it was just the way the signs came out, and it almost looks like it says for Albertans only, kind of thing, and it's got our uni logo on there. Yeah.
Some of those signs disappeared, and we're making new ones that are more specific to basically everybody help yourself and have a free mask, as well as we're adding the Alberta Health signage on how to properly use and care for your mask. And that's actually happening today. But yes, I do appreciate that concern, because I had that brought to my attention by someone the other day.
Okay. Well, it's just
I think we want everybody to have a mask. We're not.
That's right. And I understand that, essential travel is what's recommended right now, and then out of province isn't really, supposed to be promoted. But, we are a destination area, and there's a lot of things that we can't really control. And I just didn't want people to feel, that they weren't part of the process or being kind of distance. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay.
Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, and thank you, Chief Van Tighem, for your update today, and thank you for the updates for the past couple months. It's been incredible to have you join us every council meeting and provide the entire community with these really valuable. So thank you to both you and your team for all of your work and for leading us through the ECC with excellent leadership. With the hand sanitizing stations being provided by the Rotary Club, I'd just like to officially thank the Rotary Club for providing the community with the hand sanitizing stations. Something that will certainly be useful this summer. And my question is regarding the masks that might be available at the hotel fees. It was brought up last week at a community conversation. I did have a chance to follow up with email with Mayor Council, but maybe it's a question for people that are on the recovery task force, or maybe it's a question for you, Chief Van Tighem. When it comes to masks in these places like hotel lobbies, are we getting the message across clear enough from, say, Parks Canada and the municipality combined, and all of the hoteliers who are hosting guests, and also B&B stations in Jasper that are not at hotels, that we expect visitors to wear masks when there isn't the possibility of being 2 meters distanced from each other, such as in the downtown core and on sidewalks?
I think, Councillor, thank you for your comments. I think that the messaging is extremely difficult. We've worked hard with the messaging, and our target audience has been not just the residents, but as well the visitors and the staff and whatnot. But it does become complicated when we're dealing with visitors that are coming into the community, that not knowing where they come from and what messaging they're getting. But I'll go back to, I guess, to the messaging has been out there consistently, and Alberta Health has done, I think, a very good job of coming up with the different avenues and ways to spread the word. And whether or not we're getting the word specifically to visitors coming through hotel lobbies, I would say that we haven't specifically targeted that group. I guess I myself probably just assumed that the hotels would be responsible for that. But to your point, the letter that you spoke of, or the note that you spoke of, was brought to my attention on the weekend. And that is what has initiated this masking provided to the hotels for the lobbies and whatnot. And that's just actually in the works right now. And it's going to be voluntary. So we're contacting each hotel, and it's up to them whether they choose to be part of this or not. But we're assuming that most, if not all of them, will. And that at the same time, they're getting the signage with the container with the masks and a little directive on promoting the usage. So that's a step, I think, in the right direction. Whether it's exactly what we need or not, I can't speak to, but we're working on that right now. And I'm hoping that it'll have a positive outcome.
Thank you very much. And if I may, Mayor Ireland, one final comment is the testing for all Jasperites and for all Albertans. I went through my test weeks ago now, and it was very, very quick and very, very simple. So I would encourage everyone to go down and go through the process of taking the 5 minutes to get their test and know for sure that they have nothing to share with the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath.
Just to follow up on Councillor McGrath's initial question, I sit on the Economic Recovery Task Force, which meets weekly on Wednesday afternoons, and there are representatives there from the Jasper Hotel Association, Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce, and Tourism Jasper. So the very question you asked about hotel lobbies, I will raise that again. The intent of the Economic Recovery Task Force is that any of its members can take advice or direction from the task force. And so we can discuss that. As Mr. Van Tighem said, you might assume that hotels would be responsible for their own lobbies, but it's an issue worth discussing. And I will raise it tomorrow at the Economic Recovery Task Force. Anticipate that there will be some uptake on that. If there are not further questions, Mr. Van Tighem, there is Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not a question. Mr. Van Tighem, it's been a long 3 months and we have further to go, but I wanted to thank you for everything you've done during that time and everything you did for the community. I also wanted to, even though Councillor McGrath already did, I just wanted to highlight and bring attention to the Rotary Club's great contribution. I think that's a very creative and interesting addition to our downtown core, an aid to businesses and to the public to have hand sanitation stations. I think it was really creative. And I want to, again, thank the Rotary Club for that. Thank you again, Chief Van Tighem.
Thank you, Councillor.
In the absence of further questions, Mr. Van Tighem, I have just a couple of more pedestrian questions for you. Firstly, I just want to confirm that the material that is on our agenda package today, there are 2 documents dealing with stage 1, 2, 3 determinations. Can you just confirm that those are provincial relaunch documents, not local Jasper relaunch documents?
Yes, I can confirm that they're not local, and I can't specifically speak to them. I think it'd be Mr. Furcho that had those on the agenda, but I'll let him speak.
I just want to confirm that those are provincial documents. I don't intend to ask questions about them. I would defer to Mr. Furcho if he can speak up, but other than that, that's my understanding.
Yeah, that's correct, Greg. We were just intending to put on the provincial information.
Okay.
And it was requested, and I appreciate that it's there. It's good information for the public to have. Moving forward, I am just interested in our local efforts to coordinate ongoing response. And so you mentioned distribution of PPE. There may be more questions that arise with respect to physical distancing, wearing of masks. I see that some municipalities across the country, in fact, have mandated masks in public. For those sorts of issues, and perhaps this is a question better addressed to Mr. Furcho, but who in the organization, now that we are back to our normal organizational structure, who will have carriage of these issues and coordinate efforts between departments, or has that been determined?
That will be myself. As the Director of Emergency Management, I will maintain that responsibility. So I will be the conduit throughout the departments for anything COVID-19 related.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you. And the final comment I wanted to make goes back to Councillor Journault's concerns about inconsistency. And I recognize that there is a level of inconsistency and it is a concern, but I want to also comment that there is a great deal of ambiguity in the guidelines and the directions and the recommendations. And I have searched the provincial website, in particular the Biz Connect, and it is a difficult chore for any business to figure out just what exactly is expected. So I have some sympathy for those who are struggling to do the right thing and having some difficulty interpreting the documents. We had the same problem, of course, with trying to get a clarity on the question of non-essential travel, and sometimes it is simply not there. So I just want to emphasize the words of Mr. Van Tighem earlier. Let's be kind. I think that businesses are attempting to do the right thing. Let's not assume that they are doing something intentionally wrong. It is difficult sometimes to sort out what the provincial requirements are. But I thank you for raising the issue, Councillor. And again, my thanks to you, Mr. Van Tighem, for all of your reports. My thanks to the ECC. And I join with Council in thanking the Rotary Club for the donation of the hand sanitizing stations throughout the downtown core.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, your council. Thank you very much.
Agenda item 5. Is there any business arising from the minutes of June 9th? Councillor McGrath.
I just want to make sure that the conversation of public spacing in public places doesn't leave our radar or agendas. My intentions were to deal with the boardwalks first and carry on conversations about public spacing in our downtown core specifically. And over the last week, I've heard from various businesses, as I mentioned last week, but more businesses this week that feel the real unfairness and inequity in the boardwalk decision. And I'm not sure of what course of action to take, but I'm cognizant of the feelings and the heartbreak for the businesses that are being affected, but also recognizing that we still haven't yet increased distance enough downtown to make, say, walking by a sidewalk seating patio distanced enough from the diners to be safely walking on our sidewalks. So I don't necessarily have a direction where I'm hoping to go or an agenda of where I see this going best, but I just want to make sure that the conversations of safety for the residents of Jasper and the visitors is still on the table and in our minds and being discussed weekly.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a few points on the Jasper Day conversation that I put forward last week, and I hope to have a few more conversations on that going forward. There was just some concern that I was maybe proposing to have this on other weekends to coincide with other events or take over other events, and that wasn't the intention. Where I grew up, we used to have annual block parties, and this was kind of promoted throughout the city. And they weren't on specific days, and it was just a vote for what your neighborhood wanted to do and when they wanted to do it. And the streets would get closed off. People would either have like little parties in their front yards or get together. Sometimes if the street had a cul-de-sac at the end of it, that would be closed off even further. People bring out their barbecues. They'd have a clown for the kids or whatever it was. It was just something to get the community or your neighborhood together so you can meet your neighbors that you don't normally see all the time. And I think that was my first intent years ago when I was thinking about doing that in Jasper and to have block parties and things like that. I wasn't really trying to promote a festival or a huge event at this time. I know that things might have to be different this year with socially distancing. I'm just promoting something that after we get through this summer season, to do something collectively that you know, will promote community spirit and getting to know your neighbors a little better. If people want to take the initiative to do things, I think that would be great. There's no date set yet. There hasn't been a proclamation. So I look forward to getting some more community feedback on it, as well as discussing it with council. I think we could have a good opportunity to have an annual day for Jasperites. And yeah, I look forward to more discussion. I just wanted to clarify that. And for the people that were planning Canada Day festivities and people that are involved in the folk festival, by no means did I ever want to intend that I wanted to have that day on those particular days. I know that something came out in one of the local newspapers that made it look like it was a Canada Day thing. And then the suggestion that was brought forward to me on the Saturday after Labor Day, I completely forgot that that was a folk festival day. And I know that was canceled for this year, so I don't want to take over that. Or if there are plans that people have ideas to want to go forward with something, that's great. And I look forward to the conversation. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Is there other business arising from the minutes of June 9th? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm referencing in the minutes the other new business item, the second other new business item on the last page of the minutes, where Council directed staff to come up with kind notes to be left on visitors' windshields. I just wanted to be clear that there was no implication, because part of the conversation was, I think there was some conversation around enforcement of parking restrictions. I wanted to be clear, if it was the view of council, that we were issuing direction to step down or step back or in any way change enforcement of parking restrictions in conjunction with that, or if the intent was simply to in some manner distribute those notes around the downtown core. So I'm looking for clarity there. My understanding is that we have not directed any change with respect to parking enforcement. Is that the understanding of council? Okay, just wanted to be very clear on that because I recall it having been part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, and just for clarity, I share your view, Councillor Butler, that we did not intend to direct anything about parking, and I see nothing but nodding heads around the table. So I think that is confirmed, absolutely. Thank you for raising that. If there is no other business arising, we can move to agenda item 6, department reports. We have a report from Finance and Administration, Mrs. Malinchuk.
Good morning, Your Worship and Council. Today there's a report presented from February 1st until March 31st, just to highlight some of the bullet points for those that might not have had the chance to read it. There was an appeal date for assessments on April 8th. However, that assessment appeal date has been moved to July 2nd. There has been advertisement put into the paper as well as on our website about that. Our assessments can be found on our websites, and the link is provided, and that gives you 8 years of assessments. Tax notices were sent out on June 10th and 11th, so they're starting to roll into people's mailboxes now. Due date for is July 15th. However, because of COVID-19, the payment can be deferred until September 1st of this year without penalty. Although we are still encouraging payment if you are able to do so. And the municipality is also encouraging residents to sign up for electronic delivery of tax notices and utility bills going forward. We've been on the initiative with utility bills for some time now. And now we're starting to work on the tax notices as well. We've noticed an influx of more people signing up for this during the COVID-19 response, as well as more people signing up for electronic withdrawals and whatnot. So that's been a positive movement. Our auditor did present to council the financial reports on April 16th. And since they have been put on the website as well, so you can find those on our website as well as years gone by. IT, there's a lot of operational and capital work commented on in here. However, I'd just like to note that IT had a huge part of the ECC and ESS response in the needs of all of the staff needing to move and work remotely from home. So I just wanted to comment on that. He was a huge part of everything going forward very smoothly. Funding news, the municipality is receiving Municipal Sustainability Initiative money again this year for operating and capital. The amounts are noted below. Just to highlight that next year is our last year for receiving those monies. So it is a quite large sum of money that we've been receiving from them yearly that we will not be seeing past 2021. We are not sure if there will be any other programs that will be similar coming up. There hasn't been anything announced as of yet. And the federal gas tax, the amount that we will be receiving is also stated here on the report. And the last year to receive funds from this federal gas fund is 2024. In other business, we have set up the electronic fund transfers for payables. So this has been completed, just some testing needs to occur before we move forward in a live situation. So there will be some more work with that before they go out as live, but hopefully we can get more businesses signed up so that they can receive their payments in a more quicker fashion going forward. And also we've also downloaded and imported a process for receivables that has decreased paper and time required, as well as, you know, any possibility of data entry errors, which hasn't been a problem, but just eliminates that as a possibility. And going into a little bit of the COVID-19 response, as you know, our office closed March 16th, and we are talking about reopening of the facility, and we're hoping that we can reopen mid-July. So the date has not been official as of yet. We will announce it once we know the exact date, but we're waiting for all of the safety protocols to be put into place for our staff before we are open. And also attached are the financial statements for operating revenue and expenses compared from 2020 to 2019, as well as the council expense report. And you can see they're very similar. The 2020 budget has been downloaded into the system. We were working off of the 2019 budgets for some time. The numbers are now in the system to work off of, so everybody is well aware of where they're sitting at this moment. But yes, they're very similar to prior year in where we sit at this time of year. And also attached is the letter received on the Municipal Sustainability Initiative allocations, as well as the federal gas tax allocation chart. And that is it for my report. If there are any questions, I am available. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Milinchuk. Questions from councillors? Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much, Mrs. Milinchuk. I just have two questions. I'm curious about, you have said statements of funds expended have yet to be submitted. And I'm just wondering about what that statement is, what it does, what the impact, if any, is of submission of that. Is that just a matter of course, paper submitted sort of event, or does it have any impact on any current or future funding? I guess why it is that that has been mentioned in your report is what I'm asking.
Okay, yes, no impact. However, it was just a statement stating that I haven't had time to get to that. I've normally completed that by this time of year at this point, but because of COVID-19 and the amount of additional work, it has been set behind slightly. However, it should be actually completed by the end of this week.
Oh, I see. Thank you then. And then my second question is about reopening of your offices. You've said you're hoping that you'll be able to have them open by mid-July. And I'm just wondering sort of what is standing between us and being able to open that at this point? What measures are not in place, or what is it that is causing you to think it'll be about a month ahead of us?
Yes, Councillor Butler, that is mainly due to our front office situation, as we've been waiting for the setup of the plexiglass to protect our frontline staff of any people coming in. So that's the main prerogative that we have to have in place before reopening. So we're waiting on that installation.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you also, since I have the floor. I know that for you and your department also, as for everyone, the past 3 months have been a tough time. I suspect you've been putting in lots of overtime, you and your team. So thanks very much for helping the community work through this difficult time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Journault.
Thank you. Just in keeping with the comment about reopening, I believe our tax notices say that the taxes are due July 15th. We've extended the date beyond that, but the majority of people are going to have a piece of paper saying they're due July 15th. So, and they're going to want to come and pay their taxes. So I would like to think that we should have the office open slightly in advance of that date. It's just a suggestion, but the paperwork says July 15th. That's my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
no, that is correct, and that is our intention. We're actually aiming for July 6th or 13th to be open, ideally the 6th.
Thank you.
Councillor McGrath?
No questions, just a comment. Thank you very much, Mrs. Malinchuk, to both you and your team for everything you've done for the entire community during this time. Huge gratitude, and I want to make sure that you are fully recognized and appreciated for your efforts.
Thank you. I'll pass on that message.
Mrs. Malinchuk, I have just a couple of questions. Firstly, I appreciate the involvement of IT and everything that we have had to adjust for COVID-19, and I appreciate that you took the time to recognize the impact of that to helping the entire organization, and it is significant and often goes overlooked. So thank you for drawing that to our attention. At the same time, I recognize probably that one of the items that IT is looking at is the reconfiguration of council chambers to allow us to return to in-person meetings, but continue our ability to connect with the public through the Zoom platform or some other platform. You noticed in your notes that that work is still going on. Is there any expectation about when that might be done, and a date when council might be able to get back to the quorum room to hold its meetings in person and broadcast to the public?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, there has not been dates set yet on what he is working on. I will communicate with him and see if I can get more of an idea of what he is thinking on those dates and communicate them through to council. Hopefully, I see it being dependent upon the delivery of the necessary equipment.
Yes, understood. All right. I just wondered whether there was a target date, but that's fine. I know it's being worked on, and we all appreciate that. The second comment or question I have is just with respect to the Municipal Sustainability Initiative funding and the federal gas tax funding. And can you confirm that those amounts that we have received or will be receiving are exactly the same amounts that we would have received in any event, that this is not in any way any new funding based on response to COVID-19?
Your Worship, there has not been any communication that those amounts have anything to do with COVID-19. They are the general allocations that would have come through any, regardless.
Yes, thank you for that confirmation. And thank you for your report and answering all of Council's questions. If there are no other questions from Council, and I see none, thank you again for your good work. And as Councillor McGrath, I think, said, and others, please extend our thanks to your entire department for the work that they have provided for Council in the last several months. Most appreciated.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Agenda item 7, bylaws. We have no bylaws for consideration today. Agenda item 8, an information report regarding outdoor markets and Jasper Day follow-up. I think Ms. Nadon, is that yours?
Your Worship, I'll take that for today. Christine's got some other commitments this morning. The Council had left a question on the concept of existing businesses in Jasper having access to an outdoor market, and so staff did a little work, and you probably saw some of that at the Economic Recovery Task Force meeting. And we did get the responses back both from Community Futures and the Chamber that, you know, to have businesses stretch from their existing bricks and mortar location to a secondary outdoor market type location would simply stretch them too far, and they're not really set up for that this year. So there wasn't a lot of uptake for that idea. So for now, that's probably something that could be looked at a future time, but there wasn't a lot of interest to pursue that right now, was the end result of that.
Thank you for that. Any questions related to that? Councillor McGrath?
Not a question, just a remark. Thank you very much to administration for doing that and bringing it forward, and I really appreciate the outcome of it not necessarily being feasible for Jasper. There was some comment about, you know, the idea that was brought forward by Mr. Ireland, where we had some change in traffic flow and change in parking and more of not a closure in the downtown core, but a limited traffic flow, increased parking, boardwalks accompanying that. There's certain aspects of that I still see really valuable in almost the same sense that I thought a market could be valuable in having more space, being outdoors, and with the notice of inequity being with the boardwalk situation of not every business being able to build a boardwalk because, say, they have a single pane door. What is Council's appetite to consider further ideas of the downtown for this summer? Are we set on the boardwalk being final and done and all we're going to do, or do we want to continue these conversations on possibly changing things to have a increased vibrancy and more spacing downtown this summer?
Councillor Demota?
Well, thank you for bringing that up. And I believe that a couple of weeks ago that we said that we were going to start with the boardwalks and then, you know, expand thought to doing other things beyond that. And I'm looking forward to those discussions if it's the will of council to proceed and maybe look at exploring other measures that could help out all businesses in the community and traffic flow and public distancing.
Any other comments? Councillor Butler?
Thank you. It's on a related issue. We have a letter today, which I was going to mention when we got to that point on the agenda. But one simple thing that we could do, and I personally would be in favor of, downtown on Patricia Street in the primary business block and possibly on the west side of Connaught, would be to shorten the parking time from 2 hours to 1 hour, or as the letter suggests, 50 minutes, which I think is quite creative because it's kind of a way of saying that we really do mean an hour. I think it's a easy and relatively straightforward small step that we can take toward increasing traffic flow and vibrancy in those critical business areas. And it would also be a little bit of a nod in the direction of those businesses that feel that the boardwalk program will have a negative effect on their business by simply ensuring that parking downtown isn't basically just kept or made unavailable by longer term parking. I think it would be a very simple and straightforward and easy thing that we could do to just put stickers on our no parking signs, changing that to 1 hour, or as suggested, even 50 minutes. And the point raised in that letter is a good one, that if we're trying different ideas this summer, let's try that. Let's shorten parking downtown and really make those core business areas where a lot of our retail and other businesses that require ready access, let's make that work a little differently this summer so we can observe and see how it goes. So I would be in favor next week of discussing and directing accordingly that we shorten parking times in the primary business block of Patricia. I think maybe also the west side of Connaught, though I feel less strongly about that, but it might be interesting to have that conversation and consider directing accordingly.
Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I would support that, Councillor Butler. You know, small movement forward on changing and adding parking or in the area, I think is beneficial this year. I think it's probably a little bit too much for this summer, but I really do want to explore the idea of single laning Patricia, adding angle parking on both sides, and really slowing the flow of traffic there. I think is beneficial to everybody. We're adding parking, we're slowing traffic. I don't know who could argue against that, really. And the one argument was backing into traffic. Well, we're backing into traffic on both sides already with when you're parallel parking. So I think that argument doesn't have a lot of weight. So I think we should start researching that a little bit more for next year. Yeah, just making the small moves this year to assist businesses where we can.
Councillor Demota and then Councillor Journault.
I like to comment, traffic flow is cash flow to a lot of businesses. So I'm into promoting something shortened. There will be some arguments in the fact that there are some restaurants that may not have an opportunity for a boardwalk and may want to have people, in the restaurant more than an hour, or their cafes or whatever their businesses are. But having said that, maybe we could develop some communication on where there could be longer term parking in the community, and and maybe try to really promote our town as a walking community, and not necessarily closing off streets, but just promote walking. So parking in the larger parking lots and make your way into town, so that we can help we can help that flow of people and vehicles through the community.
Thank you. Councillor Journault.
Yes, I want to support Councillor Butler's suggestion about the 50-minute parking. I think it's a small thing. We can do it quickly, and it'll be an experiment, a trial. And I don't think we should be waiting a week. I think we should be proceeding with that right away so that we can have it implemented by July the 1st when our volume comes up. So I'd be prepared to make a motion that that be implemented ASAP if that's in order. Thank you.
sorry, Councillor Demotte, if that is a motion, it is, well, Councillor Journault indicated that he would like to make a motion if it is in order. It's not on our agenda. I think that to be in order, we would have to either have notice or waive notice because it's not on the agenda. And I appreciate your sentiment, Councillor Journault, that we move quickly, but we have also seen some of the impacts of moving too quickly and getting ahead of the public sometimes. So without any notice of this intended motion for today, I would be hesitant. But if you want to make a motion first to waive notice so you can make a motion at today's meeting to reduce speeds, I will entertain that, and council can determine whether or not it's prepared to waive notice and then proceed with your proposed motion. So I leave that call to you.
I just await the discussion from other councillors before I move.
Councillor Demotte?
Yeah, perhaps it could be somewhat of a notice this week, because I would like to check with admin and you know, the affected departments on implementing some of this. And I wouldn't suggest maybe overall sign changes, but if there's availability to adjust them that would require a lot of cost to it or implementation, then I'm for pursuing something. So I think that if we have some notice today and then maybe move forward next week with getting more information from administration would help.
Thank you. I am prepared to say that we have notice today. Councillor Butler initiated that notice. I think Councillor Journault certainly confirmed it. It would be, if we got to a question of waiving notice, I would be in favor of not waiving notice. A week we can survive, I think. And it is important, I think, as well, that administration look at other consequential changes, which would include, of course, enforcement by bylaw. It's going to be, I think, challenging to reduce parking from 2 hours, say, to 1 hour, and have a positive effect without some sort of rigor in the enforcement. And we will have to look at what can be achieved. But in terms of considering the matter, I am certainly very favorably disposed to considering every other step we can take. It could be parking time limits. I am still prepared for this season to look at Councillor Wilson's idea of at least reduced lanes on Patricia to open up additional parking. And I go back to Councillor McGrath's earlier suggestion that guiding all of this must be our concern for public safety, and that is the safety of our own public, our residents, and the safety of guests. And every business in town is required to make mitigations. In our facility, we are required to make mitigations. What about in our public spaces? What mitigations have we undertaken to ensure the safety of the public? And so I think all of these questions are still open, and I welcome further discussion. So to Councillor McGrath's earlier point, I think the discussion is just beginning. It has not ended with the so-called sidewalk seating issue. I think the whole range of options is open, and I welcome that discussion. And in fact, I thought when Councillor Wilson raised this issue a few weeks ago, it was intended that administration would work on something and come back to us with some sort of proposal about traffic flow and reduced speeds in the downtown core. Mr. Furcho, did you share that understanding, and is anything happening in that regard?
Your Worship, yes. So a couple things. One is kind of we're dealing with first things first, and that is the walk around as opposed to sidewalk seating. The idea being that people walk around the sidewalk. We've worked with our insurance provider. Neil Jones got that back. We did have some additional armoring requirements. We worked through some of it. So What he's doing is working with existing permit holders first, and then we're going to open up the applications for new permit holders by the end of this week. But the idea is that the insurance company is looking for more armoring. So Patricia, because we have the bulb outs, that we feel that provides some of that, but on Connaught, where we have one of those walkarounds sticking out, there's going to be a requirement for like a concrete barricade on the traffic incoming side for that, like we do with the now with the bike racks. And then we're also, I wanted to talk to council about that. I have the authority as a CAO to reduce speed limits for those stretches of the downtown. So we've inventoried our signage, and I'd be looking for, although it's in my authority to temporarily reduce speed limits, how we'd move forward with that conversation with council prior to enacting that. We did look a little bit into the alternate angle parking concept and single lane, and there was some things that still need to be discussed around that. One being with angle parking coming in Patricia, for example, just given the width of the street, if you had one lane and you had the angle parking and people parking on both sides, just depending on where the walkarounds are and where those angle parkings are, you might need to pick one side of the street or the other. So that might preclude parking on one side or walkarounds on one side. So there's a bit more work involved in rearranging the parking and then the single lane from the double lane. Just with our tourist traffic, there was just some concern around if we did drop to one lane with somewhat more congested downtown flow, if somebody stops for whatever reason and backs up the traffic, because right now, even with 2 lanes, sometimes you have 2 lanes backed up down there. And if it's down to 1 and somebody decides that they want to stop for a few minutes, what that might look like. So when you have 1 lane and people are stopped, and then you have people trying to back up and there's no break in the traffic to back up into, for example, when you have that situation. So a solid line of traffic and you're trying to back up into that solid line of traffic with no break, that was, you know, there was just some logistical things. But the one I'd like to move forward on sooner than later is once we know a little more around the uptake for the walkarounds is some stretches where I could reduce the speed limit just on a temporary basis down to 30K for the summer months. So I'd be looking, although it's in my authority, speed limits is one of those things. I'm not going to just go ahead and do that without some support of council, even though I do have that authority. That would be the next sort of step. And then anything bigger than that, I'd like a little more discussion with council prior to proceeding. But right now, sort of all of our focus and all hands on deck have been towards the development of the permit process for the walkarounds, and then actually working with the businesses to get those walkarounds, the process started. So like I said, existing sidewalk seating permit holders first, new applicants will be next, and that's coming still, and that's quite a bit of work for our manager of bylaw services. He's dealing with that on his own pretty much.
Thank you for that, Mr. Furcho. If it is the will of council, could we have this matter on the agenda for next week and consider those issues that can be addressed at that time? So that could certainly be a reduction in the 2-hour current parking limit. We could proceed at least with that and then see where we are on any other issue that may impact both vehicle and pedestrian traffic in the downtown core in particular. So it could be speed limits. If some things are not in a position to be decided, that's fine. We could perhaps pick them off one at a time, starting with parking, but at least keep this current and on the agenda so that decisions can be. Is that fair with council? Councillor Keller-Grampi?
Mayor Ireland, I'm sorry, and I forgot to add this to the agenda, but we will be deferring next week's meeting due to a seminar. So any decisions would be if we then decide to go with the June 30th meeting, which is the 5th Tuesday of the month.
Correct. Thank you for that. How we forget. Yes. Councillor McGrath.
With that being said, I think that we do have a pretty light agenda today to be able to have some of these really important discussions that are pretty timely, being that July is around the corner. I think that the less we can stand in the way of success of the businesses that may not be around next year is a huge goal of mine. I don't want to call it red tape reduction, but as much as we can step out and be permitting activities to happen on public space that is commercial use, such as sidewalk seating, or being flexible, that if you weren't able to build a boardwalk, that we find some flexibility around how you can also be successful and thrive this summer. I think that the public safety issue is the biggest concern. And I believe back when Mr. Ireland presented the closures to us, there was some parts of it that was a little bit too much for my thinking, with probably professionals being needed and it being too thorough with rerouting traffic in a different direction on the opposite side of Connaught than the businesses are. But if we could find a way to reduce speeds, to consider a single lane of traffic flow on both the business side of Connaught and Patricia, to consider possibly single parking lanes like they are right now, just pulled in, so that we create more distance possibilities from our existing sidewalks. And I believe that this is the year. I believe that this is the year to have a little more freedom and have a little more ease and less rigidity this time of year in June, when we're having these discussions, and really look at the consequences to the projects that we allowed in the fall, when things slow down and we can really reassess how things went, how the increased freedom for the ability for the businesses that may not survive to get through this time, with the municipality being their cheerleader and being on their side with making things possible that otherwise wouldn't have been possible in times. I think that if we are going to not meet next week, there's time for this discussion now, and maybe we can come up with some sort of direction, or maybe it can be revisited on the 30th of June, but I believe that that's a long time from now, and a long time for administration to not have any direction from us, and also takes away from the safety for our visitors and our residents that we could achieve.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Demoda, I see your hand, but I want to return first to Councillor Journault, who proposed making a motion following Councillor Butler's suggestion of reduced time limits. In light of Councillor Keller-Harempe's reminder that we don't sit tomorrow, certainly changes my view about how I might respond on a motion to waive notice. And so you had proposed that if it was in order, you might wish to make a motion today about parking time limits. And I suggested first that it would be in order to make a motion to waive notice. And then you were, I think, discouraged from making any motion at all. But I would invite you to go back to that if you wish, and then we can deal with Councillor McGrath's subsequent suggestion. I just throw that out. I don't want you to feel that your proposal has been unfairly limited, or your proposal for a motion. I will let you think about that. Well, go ahead and respond, because I've raised it now.
No, I don't. Thank you for that, but I don't feel I've been down. I mean, it's not over, so the discussion, I'm still prepared to do whatever it is to speed this up. But I see Councillor Butler has something to say, and I'll wait for that.
And Councillor Demota before that. You're fine, Councillor Demota?
I would like to hear what Councillor Butler has to say about that, and then I wanted to say something.
Okay. Councillor Butler.
Well, thank you. I've just been sitting here listening and thinking, and I am supportive of the idea of looking at a lane restriction in conjunction with angle parking, but I share Councillor Wilson's cautionary note that that might be a little much to accomplish this year, even though it's possible that it would be a good thing, but there's no way I could see us making a change like that without, you know, fair public notice, because I know that that will engender a lot of conversation. But reducing parking time to, like I said, I like the idea of 50 minutes, and lowering the speed limit dramatically would both really contribute to safety, and while it wouldn't per se increase pedestrian area, it would certainly increase the safety when pedestrians do stray onto the street, and they will, because they will be trying to avoid passing too closely to people. Because of the time restrictions, I would suggest that we actually have a formal motion today. And I would make that motion, though I'd be happy to leave it to Councillor Journault, because he had already offered, that we discuss the wording of our motion, and if it's something that we find we have consensus on and feel positive about, we can pass the motion 2 weeks hence on the 30th, but we would be giving the community clear notice of our intent. It's going to take administration a little while to do what needs to be done anyway to actually implement it, because at a minimum we'd need to, I think, find some stickers for the parking signs or something. So let's, by way of notice, actually word a motion today and plan to pass it in 2 weeks. That would be my suggestion. And I'll make the motion, but I think Councillor Journault was ready to do so. So please do so if you're ready to.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Councillor Butler. You threw in speed limits there, and I would just like to deal with parking. So I'll make the motion that we reduce the allowable time limit for parking on Patricia from Hazel to Pyramid Lake Road, and on the north side of, or west side of Connaught, the same area, from 2 hours to 50 minutes. I agree, you can easily replace it with a sticker. The idea of the 50 minutes is that it'll be more noticed. It'll be more attention getting. So my motion is to reduce the parking from 2 hours to 50 minutes in those zones that I mentioned.
All right, and I would accept that as notice of motion for today, but I will subject it to discussion, if not debate, with the intent that this will come back in 2 weeks. But firstly, are there any friendly amendments proposed to that motion? I am concerned about what would be involved in making the sign say 50 minutes as opposed to 1 hour, and whether that is any additional time or expense constraint. It seems to me it might be a whole lot easier to walk around and put up a sticker that says 1 instead of 2. The sign already says hours. To change the whole thing to minutes, it just seems to me that that is an administrative issue that could delay everything. I appreciate there might be some theoretical advantage in saying 50 minutes rather than 1 hour, but it just seems to me it'd be a lot easier to make a change when we don't change the units, just reduce 2 to 1 and get on with it. But only a suggestion I would throw out as a proposed friendly amendment to change it to 1 hour rather than 2 hours instead of 50 minutes. Councillor McGrath.
Forgive my lack of knowledge on the subject, and of course this council hasn't went through any changes in parking, so I don't know enough about this, but I'm wondering if you know, say a senior or a mobility challenged person might need that full 2 hour window to say get a service done at a wellness facility. So I'm not referring to my business. I was thinking of someone getting their hair done and parking outside of the hairdressers. And in relation to that, I wonder if there can, you know, would there be an exception to the handicap spots, or I just want to think about those designated spots in our parking areas before we move forward with it full-heartedly.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Journault.
I'm fortunate to be able to look at a sign right outside, right in front of me, and I don't see any difficulty with going to 50 minutes. It'd be more visible than just putting a sticker on top of the 2 to 1. I think a 50 minutes would be, even change the color right across. It's, you know, it's got a circle parking, 2 hours, 9:30 or 9 to 17 o'clock with an arrow. So we just change the 2 hours to 50 minutes. It'll just increase the visibility, I won't say the acceptance, of course, but it's just to give it profile. It's just a sticker. We can change it.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Butler.
I think I obviously would have to think about where signs are actually situated, but Councillor McGrath makes a good point, and it seems to me that we could probably exempt handicap zones.
Yes.
I think we could simply relax enforcement for those zones for sure. I don't know that each of those zones has its own specific signage. I honestly can't remember. I think it does. So probably exempting those areas would be pretty straightforward without having to actually place new signs. I know placing new signs is a whole other conversation, but I'd be in favor of exempting the handicap zones.
Councillor Journault, would you be amenable to having that added as a friendly amendment to your motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Demota.
Thank you. I just wanted to reach out to administration because this was my initial point, and I too forgot about next week. So, and that's why I was talking about the notice and then coming forward with the actual motion next week. Having said that, if we can get some feedback from Mark, or if he's reached out to somebody else already to see what the difficulties or the differences might be from changing 1 hour to 50 minutes, because I'm not sure that'll help me change my decision, but I do like the 50-minute approach. I think, like the mayor, that the 1 hour might be the easiest, but I don't know. Sure be nice to have a traffic advisory committee right now. So is Mr. Furcho able to adjust that?
Your worship, through to Councillor Demota, I'm not quite clear on what your question is. Like, could you?
Yeah, is there a big difference, do you think, like, to adjust the signs from what the mayor was saying to what Councillor Journault was saying? Is there a greater difficulty to make the adjustments to say 50 minutes as opposed to 1 hour if we were going to go in that direction?
Your worship, through to Councillor Demota, I guess if it's simply a matter of placing stickers or changing signs, it's not, you know, I'm hoping that a sticker solution would definitely be cheaper than a sign solution. Authority-wise, the bylaw does provide for the CAO to have the authority to change parking times, so that's not a big concern. We don't have to go through 3 readings of a new bylaw. The only cautionary note was just, as there is one business owner that wants them reduced, there's probably others that want them to remain the same, or the variances on how bylaw is enforced or not enforced in the downtown during this time. You know, we're going to need clear messaging on all those fronts in order for our bylaw department to function properly. So whatever is the will of council is certainly what we will work towards, and you know, how you'd like us to step through that.
Thank you. Councillor Journault, I have one further question. I think that your motion was intended to cover both sides of Patricia and the west side of Connaught, between Hazel and Pyramid Lake Road. Are you referencing only on-street parking? Because I'm not sure whether the lot by the fire hall and the lot behind the CIBC are, I think they're also 2-hour zones, but they're off-street. So are you exempting the off-street parking in your motion? I just want to be clear about exactly what we're going to cover.
Well, the lot behind the CIBC is not a 2 hours limit. There's no limit there. They park all day. So that being said, the one behind the fire hall. Yeah, I wasn't thinking of parking lots. It was just a street parking. So it's basically, it's the stores and the storefronts that, you know, have the cars move faster in front of the store. That wasn't, you know, the parking lot should be for longer term parking. That's where the hairdresser goes and the customer goes and all that stuff.
Yes, understood. I just wanted clarity. So I think then what I have, I'm sorry, Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I'll just wait for the question if it's coming up. To me, I appreciate, you know, the comments about one person, you know, writing a letter, and I'm just concerned of, you know, moving too quickly on this. Although I do think that time is of the essence. If anybody's going to have a PhD on traffic flow on Patricia Street, it's going to be Mr. Bowen. And, you know, I think he may have self-proclaimed that, but he does have a point. Like he's pretty much been born and raised on that street as far as business goes. So I do respect some of the angles, but I also feel that, you know, in the decisions that we've made in the past up to this point already, there were a few things that we didn't really bring into thought or consideration, and they arose after. And I'm thinking that might still be an issue going this way, because we haven't heard from other people and what other consequences this decision might have. So I don't know, although I want to move quick on some things, I'm not sure if I'm prepared to vote in favor of this today, even though I think it's a good idea.
There was no intent to vote today. So I'm going to formulate a question which I understood has been proposed as a notice of motion today, for the question to be called on June 30th. Mr. Burchill.
Your worship, just further to that, I think in addition to a motion, administration will be looking for some direction on what kind of feedback council might be looking for. If it's just simply people providing feedback to council through the normal channels, if we need to do any kind of extension of reaching out to the business community. Just, you know, the immediate thought that comes to mind is, although the retail sector downtown may want a quick turnaround for the parking, others, like for instance, the hairdresser may not want that quick of a turnaround. So there'd be some different messages, same with the restaurants. So just, it's a matter of, there's probably differences of opinion and how council would like to weigh those prior to making a decision, and what sort of outreach would they look for administration to have made in order to be able to answer that question, just so we're clear what council is looking for from us.
Fair enough. I had not understood that council was going to do more than give the public notice of an intended motion, so the public can respond as it chooses if there is a desire among councillors to direct administration to solicit responses or request other information, then council can direct that. To this point, I hadn't heard that in the discussion, but I leave that to the will of council. Is there, Councillor Butler?
The weekly update that we put on our website, I'm sorry, what do we call that?
Council briefs?
Briefs, council updates, whatever that is really valuable. I know that generally there's habitually, we make the community aware of decisions made through there, and then I have been seeing more posts on our social media sites where the community is updated about decisions made, but simply informing the community through those two vehicles that this decision is on the table would be helpful. And I think one thing we can say is that normal avenues of communication have provided lots of input to council, and I think people will let us know what they think, understanding that the decision will be made in 2 weeks. I'd like to see administration disseminate the information about the decision that we're considering through those two channels. Seems to me that would be adequate.
Thank you. Councillor Journault, just for clarity, and it is not part of your motion, but I want to confirm that it is intentionally not part of your motion, and that is the effective hours of the 50-minute parking. So right now, I believe our signage says 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on the 2-hour parking signs. I know that the one letter we got suggested different hours. Are you content to leave the hours as they are? Councillor Journault, go ahead. Unmute, please, Councillor Journault.
The present time limit, sorry, thank you for that. The present time is from 9 to 17 o'clock, which is 5 o'clock, and I don't propose any changes in that at all.
Thank you. So by way of notice of motion at today's meeting, I have notice of a motion from Councillor Journault that council approved the reduction of the maximum parking time to 50 minutes on Patricia Street and the west side of Connaught Drive between Pyramid Lake Road and Hazel Avenue to 50 minutes from 2 hours, exempting designated handicap parking and off-street parking. Does that reflect the motion that you intended to make? And council understands that that will be the question that comes back before us on June 30th? And all are content? Good. All right. Thank you, Councillor Journault. We have a notice of motion that will return for decision on June 30th, and it is open to all members of the public to weigh in on that. Councillor Keller-Harampe.
Mayor Ireland, do we need a motion to not have next week's meeting and to have June 30th, our next council meeting, as it's the 5th Tuesday?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
I believe we will. I was going to raise that under new business, but we're on it now. If you wish, we can deal with it and be a little bit expedient. It is related.
Okay, I can make that motion that we defer, that council will not be in session next week due to a seminar, and that we move next week's meeting to June 30th so that we can deal with these issues.
Okay. Any further discussion required with respect to that motion? And I will assume that the waiver must be made because we won't have another opportunity. Councillor Demota.
I motion to waive notice.
Thank you. All in favor of waiving notice that we can deal with Councillor Keller-Hempy's motion at today's meeting? All in favor? Waiver of notice only. That is carried. All were in favor, none were opposed. And then with respect to Councillor Keller-Hempy's motion to cancel the meeting currently set for June 23rd and reschedule that meeting commencing 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday, June 30th with appropriate notice to the public. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Well, I just wanted to say earlier when Councillor McGrath was approaching the summer and with looking at, relaxing some rules and stuff. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that wholesome approach and I respect that type of thought. And I'd like to promote that a little bit more. I know that in the past, a cash flow turnaround for a lot of businesses at the end of April. And before we used to, face our main flux of tourism right after, a few days after Stampede would let out. And then we'd have that 5 or 6 weeks that I used to call our gravy weeks to make or break it, for a lot of businesses to float themselves through the winter. And it's going to be particularly difficult this year. Also added with, our biggest campground being closed. It'll be interesting to see and observe how the spikes will be occurring, if they're just going to be weekend things or if we're going to have like a solid summer, July and August. But with all our tour buses and trains and that missing, we're going to be heavily reliant on that rubber traffic. And I think that the more thought that we can put into helping everybody out, the better. So I appreciate that approach and I'd like to promote it a little more, like I said.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. We were on agenda item 8.1. Is there any other discussion required with respect to that agenda item? All right, if not, I will say we have concluded that. Before we move to agenda item 9.1, I am going to call a brief recess. It is 11:08. We can recess until 11:15 for the comforts and convenience of all, and we'll recommence at that time, 11:15. From Councillor Wilson. There he is. All right, agenda item 9.1, a request for decision, funding for custodial and seasonal grounds position with a waiver of notice requested. Mr. Furchel.
Your Worship, so I guess first we'll deal with the waiver request. Given the timelines we're working around and how quickly things change, I think that would be our request to waive notice. So we'll deal with that one first.
And that is to waive notice to consider at today's meeting the approval of expenditures for those positions.
The two positions as listed in the recommendation, that's correct, Your Worship.
Okay. So I will need a councillor to make a motion to waive. Councillor Keller-Hempy. Discussion with respect to the motion to waive notice to hear or to consider this motion at today's meeting. If there is none, I will call the question to waive notice. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And then if you can address the actual motion or the recommendation, at least, Mr. Furchel.
All right, thank you, Your Worship. So I guess I'll just give a little background as well. Not everybody's probably read the report. So as we move forward with reopening, and of services. So first we closed services and reduced services in response to COVID, and now we're beginning to look at relaunch throughout the community. Council will have a strategic relaunch plan finalized soon, and as we're ready to relaunch services, staff will be bringing back reports to council to approve the necessary funding. So in the past week, we did hire one custodian position back. That's $35,000, including benefits. And we're looking to bring back one summer seasonal operations person. That's $27,000, including benefits. And that the two positions, what they're allowing is what you've seen already, and that was the reopening of the downtown washroom with that one person, and also adding on the partial reopening of the library and cultural center to allow JAG to operate. So that's enhanced cleaning of the entranceway in the washroom and allowing that business to operate. So those two things are underway. We're also, with a little more staff support, able to start working on the relaunch of the playgrounds, and also some partial restarting of some of our irrigation systems. And I guess the other thing I wanted to mention in this report is also talking about the funding. So as there is no funding for these positions currently in the budget, the intent would be from administration is we would, under council's authority, overexpend in the appropriate business units for those positions and track those funds. And then at the end of the year, any additional positions that have been reinstated, the cost of those will be a cost overrun in the appropriate business units in the appropriate places, but then we will track those and fund them through a reserve account. And that reserve account would be debited at year end. And how we would pay the money in that reserve account could be through a number of means. One, and the least desirable, of course, would be through debenture. Another method could be through the money that we have in our operating budget that we would otherwise transfer to the reserve accounts to pay for capital projects, as we've canceled many capital projects this year. So the operating money that's taxed for this year, rather than transferring it to reserves, would go to that account. That would be one avenue. And then there's also other potential sources of funding, one of which is the rebate on the land rent. So we were successful in a partial rebate of land rent. So the land rent money could go into that account to help pay for some of these costs. And I do know we've put some information forward both to the AUMA and FCM as they are working on trying to receive funding both from the provincial and federal governments to support municipalities, so that money then could also go into that reserve account to offset those costs. So those are the kind of exercises that would go on through the year, and then that account would be cleared at year end through any one of those means, depending on what is and is not successful through the year. So that's what you have in front of you. I've got the two recommendations that both require council approval, the full-time custodial position to the end of 2020, and one summer seasonal grounds position in the operations department.
Thank you, Mr. Furcho, Councillor McGrath, and then Councillor Demota.
I'd like to thank you, Mr. Furcho, for the way in which this is coming forward, and specifically for the information on where the funding will come from, and really just express my gratitude to administration for bringing this forward, for the way in which it's brought forward, and really for the intention of resumption of resuming our community's facilities and assets, and to maintain the quality of life that we know and love as residents of Jasper. So thank you very much for the way that this is brought forward.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Demota.
No, I'm good. Councillor McGrath addressed everything that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Mr. Furcho, I don't have the benefit of a worded motion, but the recommendation is specific to the two positions, but it says nothing about what you spoke of in regards to funding. Does the funding need to be part of the motion, or are you looking simply for a motion today to approve the expenditure for the positions, and we'll return to the funding question at a later time.
Your worship, that's correct. So what I'm looking for now is just as it's written, that council approve, because under administration doesn't have the authority to expend money outside of what's approved in the budget bylaw. So this is council approving the expenditure of $62,000 to fund, and then it goes on to talk about the two positions. And the other information around where at year end that bucket that we would draw, put the money towards would be refunded to, that was sort of more information that we'll need to deal with that through the year. So today is simply allowing us to overrun it, and those were all the potential sources that I listed after that.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
I'm in support of the rehires, but although I am concerned of, you know, at the end of the year where we're pulling that money from. You said what bucket we're pulling that money from, and I'm assuming it's reserves. And in what would those reserves, you know, be used for, if not, well, of course, not paying a salary of an employee. Why are we pulling from those reserves, and what would we use those reserves from in normal years?
Your worship, through to Councillor Wilson. So each year, as residents are taxed, the money goes into the operating accounts, and each operating account has one line that is called the transfer to reserves. So each department transfers some of their operating budget towards their reserve accounts, and those reserve accounts build up, and that allows us to fund capital projects, and it also allows us to have money set aside for future emergencies. So that is the purpose. So this year, I guess it wouldn't be a draw from the reserves, it would simply be a reduced amount going from operating towards the reserves. So the amount that flows from the 2020 operating budget into the reserve account would be more than sufficient for funding this versus sort of a reverse flow, I guess. So just if we're talking about which way the money's flowing.
Just in like layman's terms, like, are those reserves healthy at this point, or should we be putting more money into these reserves every year?
Well, it depends on what we're trying to achieve. You know, whether it's through long-term asset management plan, building reserves. You know, the intent for reserves is having some money set aside to withstand shocks to our system. I think we've seen that in the past. A couple of the reserves accounts are drawn down fairly low, Culture and Rec being one of the ones that don't really have a lot of room to move. But we do have the general administrative reserve. And I think one of the things that we need to talk about with council is moving towards what we've talked about a few times now is a rate stabilization fund. So what ends up happening now is at year end, if there's a surplus of money in any of the departments, that goes into the reserve accounts for those departments and builds up, and we expend that against capital projects or having a little set aside or for future asset management. And we could have one fund set up simply to deal with economic shocks to the system. So that's a future conversation as well.
Well, I guess nobody's arguing the fact that this is an economic shock currently, and if those reserves are for, you know, situations such as this, well, I do feel comfortable spending the money at this point. It's
certainly, you know, we will need to look at longer term strategies, but over the short term, you know, I'm fairly hopeful that the efforts of the EUMA and the FCM for provincial and federal support should come forward, but absolutely no guarantees. And, you know, all of this funding, each department and any new requests will certainly come through council, so council can be aware of what the atmosphere is out there in the political world to see whether we'll be successful or not in those.
Thank you.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you to Councillor Wilson's point, and it's a fair one where he asked if our reserves are healthy. I guess in a way that's a question of opinion that Mr. Furcho rightly doesn't necessarily want to express an opinion on, but a fact and answer is that when our audited financial statements were presented in May, our auditor informed council that we have approximately $4 million in reserves, at least at that time. So that is one helpful piece of information in respect to that question, I think.
Councillor Demota?
Yeah, and it's good. And I appreciate the points for clarification, because as we're moving through the process, it'll be helpful for us to understand exactly how those business budgets go and the allocation for the funds. And I do remember like discussing that there was the intention with what is coming through or what's requested from the community as part of our requisition, that there's going to be $820 something that is intended for transfers to reserves. And I believe that the intent is that if we were going to have some overruns with startup or rehires, that some of that could come out of there. And it is a little bit of a buffer. Initially, it was 1.1 million that was intended to go there, and we drew that back by 25%. And so I think it was like $827,000 that we might have room with. Hopefully we don't use all of that. I mean, that's not the intention, because it's there to use it, but if there's it does give us a little bit of a buffer to help us recover.
Thank you for that. I never discourage looking ahead, but just for clarity, the motion that will be presented is a motion for the expenditure with the source of funding to be determined at a later date. And it's on the table what those possible sources may be, but that is not today's decision. So if there are no further questions for Mr. Virchow, do I have a councillor prepared to make a motion that council approve the expenditure of $62,000 to fund one full-time custodial position until the end of 2020 in the Culture and Recreation Department, and one summer seasonal grounds position in the Operations Department? Councillor McGrath, you're making the motion. Any further debate with respect to the motion? I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Good, I see none opposed. There is some delay again, but I think safe to say that that is carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Virchow, for that. Agenda item 10, we have correspondence, one letter regarding downtown parking, and we have substantially addressed that in the earlier motion by Councillor Journault. If anybody feels a need to comment further, now is the time. Otherwise, I will move then to agenda item 11, other new business. Is there any other new business which councillors would like to raise? Councillor Demota?
I just wanted to say that it was reflected in the minutes that there was a request to have as a standing addition to the agenda of the Alberta phase approaches. I forgot the term. I was just looking it up, but I'd just thanking the administration for having that added. And if that was addressed already, I apologize. But I noticed it was on the agenda for today, and it was commented on in last week's meeting. So I appreciate the addition of that.
Anything else? I would like to raise then notice of perhaps direction when it is appropriate to do so, and that may not be at our next meeting on June 30th, but sometime in the not too distant future. I would invite council to consider directing administration to perform an audit of our own organizational policies and procedures with a focus on systemic bias, particularly in recruitment and promotion and potentially provision of service to the public. I think that we have an obligation to to look in-house to see whether we have inadvertently permitted policies to stand, which may have impacts that were unintended. It's a global issue, and I appreciate that in current circumstances, staff may not have time to look at it, but I think we should be on record as being interested in taking stock of our own policies and procedures and see where we can make improvements. So I raise that today simply as notice, but I give you all the time you might need to think about it, but at some point, I would encourage council to direct administration to perform such an audit. Councillor McGrath?
Mayor Ireland, I'm not sure where this would fit in, but we have had presentations this year, and we did participate in a survey on measuring our inclusion, and I believe that would probably go hand in hand with your request to review the policies and procedures.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Demota and then Mr. Furcho.
Well, I just wanted to say I appreciate that approach, and it shows good leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Furcho?
Your worship, your timing is pretty good with that, raising that item, because I was actually talking to staff earlier this week just on that. We do have that inclusion grant, but we were deciding whether or not we move ahead with that process this year, just given the amount of stress and strain that is on our administrative staff team right now, just in delivering day-to-day services, if we wanted to go through with adding another layer of auditing. And so it wasn't something I was sure we were going to deal with this year. I can say, you know, in general, Jasper is an inclusive workplace, but the inclusivity guidelines as per the UMA grant and how we match that or meet that, I guess if council would like us to do that, I'll hold off on making any decisions around that. But that is definitely, as Councillor McGrath put it, that there is a program with some funding support for an individual in our organization to be hired to deal with that. So we would have another staff person looking at that under that grant funding or turn that grant away. My only concern is that person needs to do that work without adding workload to everybody else. Like to add operations staff are pretty stretched now, so to add another job onto their task list would just be the concern. So I'm glad it was raised today. I'll hold off on any decisions regarding that grant until council makes a decision.
Perfect. Yeah, not my intent at all to overwhelm staff with additional work, but important to go on record, I think, that we are aware of the issue and will happily address it. Councillor Demota?
Yeah, just inquiring if, is there an expiry on that grant, Mr. Furcho? Or does anybody else know?
Councillor McGrath, are you aware of that grant, the details? I'm not sure of the details. We were going to ask the province whether we could get a 1 year, sort of a 1 year extension on that one, just to put it to when we might have a little more capacity for other stuff.
Councillor McGrath?
I don't have an answer for that, but I'm sure that the director of the CFS department and Mrs. Riddell would probably have an answer and know the information that we require.
Thank you. Any other new business for council today? Councillor Demota?
I'm just checking to see if, I know that we did have a quick update on our ELS grant, and I'm just wondering if we have any new news on that, or if there is anything coming down from the province on extensions or potentials of that.
Councillor McGrath?
I did have a conversation with the MLA, Martin Long, last week, and the conversation was fully around no answers have been provided yet, but he's on it and he's advocating at the provincial level for us. And whenever there is information available to give us an update, he will be sure to deliver it to us.
Thank you for that. Third and final call for new business. All right, seeing no other new business, councillor reports. So Councillor Keller-Harampe.
Tomorrow, we have a board meeting for Community Futures West Yellowhead, and then on Thursday we have the AGM. So this week is quite busy with Community Futures.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Harampe. Councillor McGrath.
Yesterday, I attended a library board meeting for the municipality of Jasper. Tomorrow, I will attend a community conversation. And last week, I attended a community conversation as well. And Monday, I will be attending a Zoom meeting with the Yellowhead Regional Library.
Thank you. Further reports? If there are none, upcoming events, again, tomorrow, the weekly conversation with the community team. And Councillor Keller-Harampe made mention of the Community Futures AGM. Anything else that's coming up in respect to which council should be advised? If there is not, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn at 11:39. Somebody? Sure, then they all come at once. I'm going to say that Councillor Wilson won that race. Motion to adjourn, all in favor? There are none opposed. We are adjourned. Thank you all, and thank you to all of those members of the public who joined us today. Appreciate your interest. Thank you all.
Thank
And
you.
next week's meeting is canceled, so we will see the public again on the morning of June 30th. Thank you all. Good day.
Thank you. Have a great day.